John, what's up? Long time no see. What up, Jimbo? How's it going? It's going pretty good, John. Did you read about the college football championship? I definitely think Princeton won that. Yeah, me too. They're the clear-cut favorite for the 1920 championship this year. But did you hear about the ratification of the 18th Amendment? Yeah, I did. And I've been planning something. So I've been thinking about making my own alcohol now. I've been thinking about it ever since they proposed it in 1917, but I'm really thinking I'm gonna distill some and try to make some at-home stuff. And you can try some if you like. Well, that's tempting, but I don't think I can. I just need to think it'd be good for me just to take a break or try to do it, but I hope all goes well with you. Yeah, man, I'm really thinking this is gonna be my year. I think I'm really just gonna be able to. Everyone's gonna want to buy it. The market's gonna be huge, and I'll be so secret. No one will ever catch me. So you're really trying to get rich quick, huh? Well, best of luck to you. Hello, class. My name is Nate Corcoran, and I did my final presentation on Prohibition. So what Prohibition was it was an era from 1920 to 1933 where alcohol was illegalized in the United States, the consumption, the distribution, the production, and it led a lot of people during that time going from a heavy bar, drinking saloon type culture to just cold turkey alcohol led to a lot of people producing it illegally, and it becoming more dangerous to consume and to be caught with. So how it began, it started with the temperance movement. They really started advocating and pushing for the outlawing of alcohol because they saw it as they blamed it on all of America's issues, from violent crimes to suicides, and they wanted an entire American culture change because they saw it as a lot of outlaws and gangsters, and their intention was to have less crime. That's what they thought would happen if there was no alcohol, and just less bad things happen, because they really did blame everything on it. It took off in the 1820s, and it kind of steadily grew more and more, becoming a bigger party. And then it really became widespread amongst English-speaking countries. It wasn't just in America, it was in Europe, it was in Canada, where they all really outlawed or became prohibitionists. But it really peaked in the 1920s, and at the end of the 1910s, right after World War One. That's when it wasn't just the United States, it was Canada, France, Sweden, all outlawing the sale of alcohol, and it was mainly religiously backed, as it is a sin to indulge yourself to get drunk in alcohol, and Christianity was a big part of the law, especially back then. And so from the temperance movement, we get the Anti-Saloon League that was a lobby for the temperance movement, for prohibition. And it was founded in 1893. It was the key progressive movement that really pushed for prohibition. It was the most influential lobby of prohibition, and it was also religiously backed. And it also had involvement with the Ku Klux Klan, and that involvement eventually led to the demise of the Anti-Saloon League, as they could not separate themselves or distinguish themselves really from each other. They all always were getting mixed up. and people couldn't tell the difference between the two after a certain point. So their goal was the American culture change. It was the main goal of the temperance movement. It was, the American culture was believed to be centered around the bars and the saloons of the time, and just really just working, getting drunk, coming home. And they blamed booze for most of society's issues, and especially violence and crimes, most importantly, like petty thefts and stuff like that. Then came the 18th Amendment, which was brought up by Woodrow Wilson, and it was ratified, or it was proposed in August 1917, and it had a landslide victory in the Congress and the Senate amongst both parties, not just Democrats, not just Republicans. But it ended up becoming ratified and really took effect in January of 1919. And only 2 states rejected that were both in the Northeast. I believe it was Connecticut and Rhode Island. It was also known as the National Prohibition Act, or the Volstead Act, and it took effect on January 17th, 1920. So the specifics of what it did, or what this amendment did, is it illegalized the purchasing and selling of alcohol, the distribution, the consumption of intoxicating liquor, which became another issue in and of itself, because most of the general public believed that beer and wine would not be included with this, especially wine, because there is religious purposes for it. And whenever the people kind of realized, or that the government really started cracking down on wine and alcohol, or wine and beer, then that's when the general public kind of started to have unease and distrust with the government, because they thought they kind of felt like they had been played. So the immediate changes, so they saw a significant reduction in alcohol at first, because it now was illegal to make it. You couldn't just go to the store, get beer, alcohol, or anything like that. So at first people really didn't know what to do, but it kind of led to the production of people making their own alcohol. It was called rot gut alcohol, and this was because of how dangerous it was and how sick it could make you, because the distilling process at home was a lot more dangerous and less scientific than those in a brewery or in a distillery. It led to the deaths of more than 10,000 people from methanol poisoning from not distilling the alcohol correctly. And initially the murder rate and crimes fell for the first 2 years, but then it soared to record highs with the upcoming of organized crime. And crime rate rose by nearly 25% during this time. And the rise in organized crime. So it all started with bootlegging, which began in towns close to the borders and close to ports, so it'd be easier for distribution. And it was often supplied by foreigners for profit. They were seeing a lot of people from Cuba, the Bahamas, that were importing it, and they were easily getting a quick profit out of it on the black market. The Coast Guard was on alert for alcohol in shipping containers, because there were so many that got through from the Bahamas, from Cuba, from Canada, that they really started cracking down and ended up having to search all the containers to see if there was alcohol in it. It was treated really similar to hard drugs today, as a no tolerance policy at all. And at the time, there were prescriptions over the counter for alcohol and for medicinal purposes, similar to marijuana today. And a lot of these prescriptions were getting forged for that reason. And it ended up becoming a gateway crime for upcoming gang rings in large cities, especially Chicago, New York, were kind of the hubs of the mafia and the mob. And we can't talk about the mafia and the mob without talking about Al Capone. He was the most notorious crime boss in American history. he started in Chicago, and they started on bootlegging alcohol, and um, he ended up was so powerful in the city. He had connections with the mayor and the Chicago Police Department, and this allowed him to kind of free range however he wanted, and didn't have to worry and always look over his back about the cops and stuff. And there was a lot of corruption at the time. He kind of was like the leader of the city in and of itself because he was above the law. He was viewed by many of the people of Chicago as a modern day Robin Hood because he was in the public eye, he was a great philanthropist. He'd donate to many charities and help people out all the time. But the way he got his money was all illegal. And it led to him especially urging a lot of violent crimes in the city with other mob bosses of Chicago. And this also led to St. Valentine's Day Massacre, where they publicly murdered 7 other people affiliated with other gangs in Chicago, and this led to Al Capone's demise in the public eye, as people saw more of a gangster now than of a philanthropist. All right, the 21st Amendment, the ratification, it was ratified in December 5th, 1933. It was the first time an amendment had ever been appealed, or it is still the first time. As the public and the government realized that prohibition became unenforceable, and they could not crack down on every single person that was consuming, distributing alcohol, and that the jails and incarceration rates had soared to a point where they couldn't take more people in. They just had to give them petty fines for their alcohol consumption or whatever it may have been. But the 21st Amendment also bans the transportation of alcohol into dry states because this amendment made alcohol rights a state issue, and a lot of states did still wanted to stay dry. And the last dry state lasted until 1966, and this was Mississippi. And you can still see some dry counties today. There have been some around in Georgia up until recently. Statesboro for a long time, up until 2009, was a dry county. The immediate changes, bootlegging became obsolete after the ratification of the 21st Amendment, because now you could just go to the grocery store and get liquor, alcohol, or whatever you may have needed. And huge drop-off of methanol poisoning and and after this no one died because it was legalized and the distilleries would get it. Organized crime lost complete power because their main source of income was bootlegging, and now they had little to no funding. Crime fell after Prohibition was over as well. So the impact and the influence it has on today's politics. So this was the origin of American censorship, and the first time they kind of had a freedom or right of the American people taken away. It was a precedent for banning and outlawing items and it showed how black market can run and corrupt entire cities, like how Al Capone did with Chicago, and there were many mob bosses and mafia ties in New York as well. The comparison to Reagan's war on drugs, it had the same intentions, where they thought that it would be better for the American people and it'd be safer if these drugs weren't on the market, or if they were more heavily prosecuted against. And this leads to, again, more incarcerations, filling up the jails with non-serious and less violent crimes. And now it also continues and increases the influence the black market has on American society today, and it makes the purchasing and incarceration rates more dangerous than the drugs themselves, and this still applies today. And in conclusion, the 18th Amendment was a complete mistake, And people will attempt to get what they want regardless of the law, regardless of what people will try to tell them to do. And it makes the world a more dangerous place rather than just letting it be allowed and let people do however they please. It gives rise to the black market and gives them power, and it will also cause distrust and unease with the government. And that was my presentation on prohibition.